The skies over Theron Prime wept with ash and fire. Storm clouds churned like wounded beasts, thunder clashing with the screams of orbital bombardments. The once proud interstellar alliance, now a broken shield, clung to survival in the planet's crumbling outposts. Once a symbol of unity between species, it had been shattered by betrayal and hubris. Now only Earth's forces remained on Theron Prime, forgotten by allies, hunted by enemies, and surrounded by the brutal machines of the Zenith Dominion. The last human stronghold stood atop a cracked plateau, shielded only by failing energy barriers and the bones of fallen comrades. Inside its trembling walls, soldiers no longer fought for victory. They fought because retreat meant extinction. A captain barked orders no one had the strength to follow. Medics screamed for power to failing autosurge units. Drones sparked in midair, dropping from the sky like dying fireflies. And above it all, visible through the shattered dome of the command tower, loomed the Dominion's dreadnought, casting a blood-red eclipse over the land. This was no battlefield. This was a graveyard in slow motion. And as the last transmissions from orbit ceased, everyone understood. No one was coming. Theron Prime wasn't humanity's frontline anymore. It was its funeral pyre. Lieutenant Mason Cole didn't feel like a hero. Not anymore. He sat alone, helmet resting beside him, the faint hum of failing systems buzzing like flies. His armor bore the scars of 100 battles, but inside it, he was just a man haunted by the past. He had once fought with hope, with purpose, but hope had died on Vega 9, along with his younger brother Jace. One plasma round had stolen everything. Since then, Mason only fought because he didn't know what else to do. The men called him Iron Hand, a nickname earned from his brutal efficiency and unshakable calm. But they never saw the way his hands shook after each battle, the way he stared at old photos, as if willing time to rewind. He was respected, feared even, but he was not whole. And though he commanded what remained of Alpha Division, he didn't feel like a leader, just a survivor, dragging ghosts behind him. Tonight, those ghosts whispered louder than usual. The Zenith Dominion had grown tired of attrition. From the bowels of their dreadnought, Krathos descended, their final answer to human defiance. Not a soldier, not a machine, something between. He dropped into the battlefield like a meteor, shattering steel and bone with his landing. His armor rippled, grown, not forged, organic plates layered with alien muscle, pulsing with every step. His eyes glowed a sickly green, devoid of mercy. The air around him twisted with unnatural heat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He moved like death incarnate, slicing through bunkers with living blades, tearing through reinforced exosuits like they were paper. He didn't kill to win. He killed to send a message. Resistance is meaningless. Entire squads vanished in seconds. Even veteran snipers couldn't track his movements. By the time they fired, he was already gone, or worse, already behind them. Krathos wasn't just a weapon, he was fear weaponized. And when his gaze locked on to the last command post of humanity's Theron Prime resistance, he began walking toward it, slowly, as if savoring the hunt. Mason watched as Krathos butchered the front lines. He recognized the screams in his comms, his people torn apart in real time. Explosions lit the sky, not as acts of war, but like funeral pyres. Private Jenkins, gone. Corporal Rhea, gone. He'd trained them, laughed with them, buried others beside them. Now their last words echoed in static. And then, Sergeant Hale. Her voice cracked over the comms.
He's here! Mason! He's... static. Silence. He tried to move, to issue commands, but he froze. Not from fear, but from something colder. Grief fused with guilt. For a moment, time split. He saw his brother's body again. The same blood, the same chaos, the same failure. Mason wasn't just fighting Kratos. He was drowning in the weight of everyone he couldn't save. And now, that weight was unbearable. Kratos breached the command post without ceremony. He moved through steel walls like they were paper, tearing open the final barrier to humanity's resistance. The surviving officers barely had time to react. Mason's second-in-command lunged forward, only to be impaled, lifted, and thrown like a toy. Screams echoed, gunfire sparked. It didn't matter. Kratos slaughtered the room with casual brutality. And then, stillness. Mason lay half-buried beneath rubble, blood dripping from his forehead. His armor was cracked, broken, but he was alive. He opened his eyes, just in time to see Kratos standing over the corpses of his team, breathing slowly, almost calmly. That's when it happened. Mason didn't feel fear. He felt rage. The kind that burns cold. The kind born not from anger, but from grief too deep to cry out. Kratos turned. Their eyes locked. Something shifted. For the first time, Kratos hesitated, because Mason stood up, alone, wounded, outmatched, but unbroken. Mason tore off the remains of his chest plate, grabbed the only thing left, a plasma knife with half a charge, and he walked forward. His voice was low, cracked, but it echoed like thunder. "You think you're the end? You're just the reason I stop holding back." He charged. Kratos roared and swung. Mason slid under, slicing through the joint of the monster's grown armor, drawing blood that hissed like acid. Kratos stumbled. Another strike, another scream. The human wasn't supposed to fight like this. Not after all that loss, not with nothing left. But that's what made Mason dangerous. Because humans don't break when they lose everything. They get angry. And angry humans, they make gods bleed. Smoke choked the air. Trees, once towering and lush, now stood like blackened skeletons against the blood-orange sky. Mason Cole crawled out from beneath the collapsed wall of his outpost, half of his armor torn, blood soaking through his sleeve. The battlefield was gone, just fire, ruin, and the buzzing of enemy drones carving lazy arcs through the burning sky. Each breath felt like knives in his lungs. His comms crackled, static, then silence. He was alone. Behind him, the last fallback line had been annihilated. In front of him, only jungle, a tangled mess of Theron Prime's wild, primal beauty, now caught in the crossfire of extinction. He staggered to his feet. The jungle beckoned like a trap and a sanctuary all at once. He had no direction, just one instinct: move, survive. Branches whipped against his face as he pushed forward. Far above, drones spanned the canopy, heat seekers humming like vultures. He dove into a creek bed, heart pounding, dragging his injured leg through the muddy current. A whisper of pain laced every movement. And still, he moved. Because dead men don't make promises. And he'd made one. Mason crouched beneath layers of twisted vines and broken leaves. His body screamed for rest, but his eyes stayed wide. Through the torn jungle canopy, he saw a clearing, lit with firelight and filled with horror. Kratos stood at the center, massive, impossibly calm. His armor pulsed faintly, alive with alien energy, bone-like plating shifting with each movement like it breathed. Around him, humans begged, some wounded, some holding each other, all afraid. One by one, Kratos silenced them. No words, no hesitation. A blade formed from his forearm, long and curved, like the fang of some nightmare beast. Mason had seen war, he'd taken lives. But this was extermination. A child clung to a woman's body. Krathos stepped past them both and drove his blade into the man trying to crawl away. Mason's fists clenched in the muck. His blood boiled, not just from rage, but from helplessness. They weren't fighting soldiers anymore. They were hunted. And Krathos wasn't just a weapon. He was a message. Hidden deep in the jungle bunker system, the last remnants of high command argued. Mason, moving quietly through the ruined comms shack nearby, tapped into a private field frequency, one he was never meant to hear. "This isn't a battle," said General Rains. "It's a slaughter. Theron Prime is lost." "We still have ground teams out there," someone replied. "Maybe Colonel Hess. People like Cole. We can't abandon them." "We don't have the luxury of hope anymore." Mason leaned against the cracked wall, blood on his lips, eyes burning. Hope? They were talking about hope like it was some kind of luxury. They were giving up. "They want us to die quiet," Mason muttered to himself, cutting the channel. In that moment, the jungle felt smaller, colder. If command was breaking, then it was up to the broken. The night brought silence. Mason built a small fire in a cave, hidden under thick jungle overgrowth. Rain sizzled against the embers. Exhaustion pulled at his limbs, but memory kept him awake. David's laugh, his stupid jokes during basic training, the way his younger brother had always looked up to him, no matter how hard Mason tried to push him away. And then, that day, the Zenith ambush, screams over the radio, static. Mason had found David's body 2 hours later, half crushed, still reaching for his rifle. "You hold the line," David had said the night before, eyes shining with pride, no matter what. Mason stared at the fire, jaw clenched. That promise hadn't died. Not with David, not with the others, not even now. Pain didn't break him. It reminded him he wasn't dead, not yet. The ruins of a refugee zone loomed before him, cracked buildings swallowed by vines, their walls covered in ash and desperation. He moved carefully, his rifle low, eyes scanning. Then, movement. A girl, no older than 8, trapped under metal debris. Mason dropped his weapon and dug. With his bare hands, he lifted, grunted, and pulled the twisted slab off her fragile frame. She didn't cry, didn't speak, until she looked into his eyes and whispered, "You're all we've got left." Something in Mason's chest cracked open. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, not just survival. The child's words weren't just true, they were prophecy. He couldn't die, not yet. Too many were already gone. Too much was riding on one heartbeat still beating. The hidden evac station glowed dimly beneath camouflage netting. Inside, medics gasped when Mason staggered in, bloodied and wild-eyed. "Lieutenant, evac's prepping. You're lucky we—" "I'm not leaving." Silence. Mason tore off the tracking chip from his wrist and tossed it on the ground. "I saw what Krathos did. If we leave now, we don't just lose Theron, we lose everything. You're one man. I'm enough." The commanding officer hesitated, then nodded slowly. Mason limped toward the armory, grabbing scavenged explosives and stealth tech from prototype lockers. No backup, no plan for extraction, just one goal: kill the unkillable. He looked back only once. Tell them we're not done. Tell them we fought. As the evac shuttle rose, Mason disappeared into the jungle once more. Not a soldier, but a ghost with fire in his eyes. Smoke still curled behind Mason as he pushed through the thorned underbrush of Theron Prime's lower jungle. His body was patched with burn wounds and grit, but his eyes burned with purpose. The memories of Krathos' slaughter haunted every breath, but so did the promise he'd made to the child. "You're all we've got left." Mason wasn't leaving, not without a fight. He found them one by one. Kale, a grizzled combat medic with a twitch in his hand and a 1,000-yard stare. He didn't talk much, but his scarred knuckles and stitched-up gear told stories no words ever could. He only agreed to join Mason after a long silence and one bitter mutter. "If I can't save them, I'll help bury the bastards who did this." Then came Unit 17, a disabled Zenith recon drone Mason had stumbled upon in a collapsed command center. Damaged but salvageable, it had just enough AI left to follow orders. Mason rewired it using scrap tech and voice commands, embedding it with a new
Sabotage. And then there was Ro, a Zenith defector, if you could call him that. From a caste labeled Whisperers, Ro was a lean, translucent-skinned humanoid with eyes like fluid mercury. He spoke in strange metaphors and sorrow-laced riddles, always with an air of guilt too deep to name. "I was born in silence," Ro said during their first meeting, "and trained to pretend I heard nothing. But I saw the culling. I felt the regret bloom like infection. I don't want to be part of this death anymore." Despite doubt, Mason took him in. They didn't have the luxury to be picky. They were humanity's last spark on Theron Prime, and they were going to light hell on fire. The jungle, once a maze of terror, became their weapon. Ro's knowledge of Zenith patrol patterns proved invaluable. Unit 17, now called Ghosty by Kale, scouted enemy supply lines, sending encrypted pulses when convoys neared. Mason's ragtag team struck with brutal efficiency. Homemade EMP mines, collapsing tree traps, incendiary lures. One night, a Zenith ammo hauler exploded in a silent inferno, flames dancing in the fog. Another day, a patrol unit vanished after crossing a ridge, only for Kratos to arrive hours later and find their armor melted, twisted like scrap. The super soldier was no longer just hunting, he was reacting. For the first time, Mason saw it. The tiny delays in Kratos' movements, the pause before his decisions, the brutal efficiency beginning to fray at the edges, the cracks in perfection. Kratos is adjusting, Ro warned during a whispered strategy meeting. They are updating his parameters, but every adaptation costs energy, pattern, identity. Kale loaded another energy cell into his rifle. Good, let's keep making him pay. Even with limited supplies, each ambush was a declaration. We are still here. And every time Kratos was forced to change, he became a little less unstoppable. It happened at dusk. They had just pulled back to a makeshift shelter, a buried outpost beneath the ruins of a hydro plant. Everyone was tired, low on food, even lower on sleep. Then came the whine of a Zenith aerial strike. The roof exploded. Shrapnel tore into Kale's arm. Unit 17 lost its left sensor array. Ro scrambled, whispering codes Mason couldn't understand as they fled through hidden tunnels. It wasn't coincidence. It was betrayal. After regrouping in a nearby ravine, Mason's voice cracked. Someone gave us up. The silence was cold and loud. Then Lena, a young recon scout Mason had recruited from the ruins, looked away. "I told them. I just wanted it to stop. They promised if I helped them find you, they'd take me to a civilian camp." Kale stepped forward furious. "You doomed us all." "No," Mason interrupted, holding up a hand. "She made a choice, a human one. Fear, hope, regret." Lena sobbed, dropping to her knees. "I thought it was over. I didn't know you were fighting." Mason said nothing for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Next time, ask." The group didn't forgive her, but they let her stay. Because in war, betrayal wasn't rare. It was a question of what you did next. The days that followed were hell. Kale stitched wounds with shaking hands. Ammo ran dry. Food became insects and roots. Morale cracked like ice under pressure. And then Ro snapped. "You lead like a martyr, not a commander," he said one night. "Is this about winning or dying with purpose?" Mason stared into the fire, eyes hollow. "We don't have the numbers, just the idea. If we hold out even a little longer, it gives others time. Hope. Hope doesn't stop orbital fire," Ro replied coldly. The group nearly fractured. Arguments erupted. Even Ghosty's systems began malfunctioning. But Mason didn't argue. He acted.
The next day, he led a raid alone, disabling a Zenith comms tower with nothing but a shock pack and a fuse wire. He limped back bloody, but victorious. No speeches, no glory, just fire in his eyes and resolve in his walk. Kale grunted, dumb, brave, still human. Ro, watching silently, said nothing, but something in his posture changed.
Mason used to bark orders. Now, he listened. He asked Kyle about better medical rotation. He let Ro propose ambush strategies. Even Lena was assigned scouting, under supervision, but with trust. The shift was slow, but real. Mason wasn't just fighting, he was leading. The turning point came during a supply run gone wrong. A young refugee boy, no older than 10, stumbled into crossfire as the group retreated. Mason could have kept moving. Instead, he dashed back. Bullets tore past. He threw himself over the child, shielding him as Ghosty deployed smoke and Kyle covered their exit. Later, the boy clung to Mason's leg. "You came back," he whispered. "Always will," Mason said softly. That night, Kyle passed Mason a ration bar without a word. Even Ro offered a small bow of his head. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were a family. The Zenith outpost was quiet, too quiet. They breached it during a storm, lightning masking their entry. What they found chilled them more than any weapon. Control terminals, neural links, data logs. Kratos wasn't acting alone. He wasn't even alive in the normal sense. His thoughts, his rage, it's all programmed, Ro whispered. They feed him emotion, pain, voice modulation. They watched archived footage of Kratos screaming as a child, before his body was surgically hollowed out and networked into the Zenith battle grid. Kyle grimaced. He's not a soldier, he's a damn puppet. And in that sterile room lit by dying sparks, Mason saw it clearly. The face he'd hated, the killer he'd vowed to destroy. He wasn't a monster. He was made to be one. They escaped with the data, but the real shift happened in Mason's heart. Sitting beside the fire that night, he stared into the jungle. Rain whispered through leaves. Thunder echoed. Ro approached. "You've changed." Mason didn't look up. "I spent so long wanting to kill Kratos, to make him feel what we've felt. But now," he paused, "now I wonder if he already does." Kyle scoffed. "You're saying we let him live?" "No," Mason replied. "I'm saying we free him. Whatever's left of the real Kratos might still be inside, buried, screaming." Ro placed a hand over his own chest, a strange alien gesture of mourning. "Perhaps your greatest weapon is mercy." Mason stood slowly. "Maybe mercy is what makes us human." The fire crackled louder. Because sometimes the boldest fight wasn't to destroy the enemy. It was to remind them they had a soul. The air was heavy with memory. Mason stood atop a rusted observation tower, its supports groaning beneath him like the bones of an old god. Below, the ruins of Vanguard outposts lay half swallowed by the jungle, vines twisting through shattered glass and crumbling steel. This was once humanity's pride, now forgotten, overgrown, buried in Earth's last breath. "Perfect," Mason muttered, his voice rough from smoke and war. "We ended here." His team gathered in silence. 4 remained. Rika, the medic with dead eyes and steady hands. Echo, the reprogrammed Zenith drone who now painted his war body with human graffiti. And Talon, the Zenith defector who spoke in riddles and flinched at thunder. Mason walked the grounds, tracing memories embedded in shattered concrete. A child's drawing faded on a wall, the husk of a burned flag, bloodstains older than the war. "This place has ghosts," Rika whispered. "We all do," Mason replied. "Let them watch." The plan was madness, but war had long since stopped making sense. Kratos would come, and Mason would make this graveyard the last page of his story. Rika laid her last EMP charges near the West Breach. Talon used fusion scrap to turn floor tiles into proximity bombs. Echo silently calibrated the old turrets,
ancient relics that hadn't fired since before the Zenith came. Mason sat alone in the command hub. The screens flickered with static ghosts. One by one, the team came in to record final messages.
Rika's voice trembled only once. "If my brother ever hears this, I tried. I didn't run." Talon simply said, "They were wrong about us. Even me." Echo transmitted data into a language only the next generation of drones might understand. Mason stared at the recorder. "We fought not because we were strong," he said, "but because no one else could remember what hope felt like. Maybe that's enough." Then he destroyed the recorder. At midnight, they stood beneath the cracked sky. Stars blinked like old wounds. No one spoke, no one slept. They waited. Dawn didn't break, it bled. Dust rose like fog as Kratos emerged from the tree line, taller than myth, armored like a god. Each step crushed the bones of the jungle. His eyes, glowing with artificial malice, scanned the ruins. "Human presence detected," his voice boomed, monotone and merciless. The first trap exploded beneath his foot. Useless. He didn't even flinch. "Engaging extermination protocol." Rika opened fire from the eastern tower. He turned. One shot, she was gone. Talon screamed. He struck from behind, slicing with stolen zenith blades. Kratos spun and impaled him through the gut. "Traitor. Deleted." Echo detonated the inner corridor trap. For a second, Kratos staggered, enough for Mason to drag Talon's body into cover. His eyes were still moving. "Don't waste this death," Talon whispered. Then he stopped breathing. Mason's hands trembled as he armed the final charge. Mason ran through the ruins. Kratos followed, relentless. The ambush had failed. Everyone was dead. But Mason wasn't running to escape. He was bait. He lured Kratos into collapsed buildings, fired shots to mislead, tossed sound decoys made from Echo's broken speaker core. He fought dirty, fought smart. He burned the fuel depot, turning the sky orange. He flooded the old bunker to slow Kratos' gate. He used everything except surrender. Kratos began to hesitate. Target erratic, analyzing. Mason's only answer was a firebomb to the face. Kratos caught Mason by the throat, slamming him into a wall. "You are obsolete, weak, a failed prototype of war." Mason coughed blood, then smiled. Still breathing, he broke free, swinging a steel pipe. Kratos blocked it with ease, but Mason wasn't aiming to kill. He aimed to humiliate, to confuse. "You fight with rage, emotion, chaos." Mason spat in his face. "I fight with memory." Every blow Mason landed recalled someone lost. A brother, a friend, a city burned. He wasn't built to win, but he refused to lose. Kratos slammed Mason into the earth. The air rushed from his lungs. He couldn't move. Fingers like razors closed around his throat. Vision dimmed. In that darkness, he saw his brother. Young, laughing, bleeding in Mason's arms as Kratos, this very monster, watched uncaring. Something broke. Rage boiled past pain. Mason surged up, headbutted Kratos, then drove his thumbs into the machine's glowing eyes. "Remember him," he roared. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was avenging. Kratos stumbled. Systems flickered. Mason picked up a shard of the Vanguard flagpole and drove it through the warlord's chest. "You don't get to forget," Mason growled. Kratos rose, sparking, staggering. His voice stuttered. "Protocol. Corrupted." Mason stood, barely alive. Face swollen, arm broken, fire all around. But he smiled. "You don't know how to fight a man who wants to die on his feet." Kratos aimed his weapon. It failed to lock. Target, undefined. Purpose, conflicted. Mason stepped forward. "That's the difference between us. You were built to follow code. I was born to break it." He tossed a flare behind him. It ignited the final trap. The ruins collapsed. The battlefield was silent, eerily so. Smoke hung in the air like ghosts refusing to move on. Craters still steamed, the remains of war machines scattered like broken bones. Mason staggered forward, every breath a struggle, blood dripping from his shattered armor. His rifle was long gone, hands bare, chest heaving. Before him stood Kratos, towering and still. The monster's claws, each one forged to tear through tank plating, were inches from Mason's face. But they weren't moving. With a faint clink, the blades retracted into Kratos' gauntlets. His red eyes dimmed slightly, the whirring of internal weapon systems fading to silence. Mason stared, confused. No more gunfire, no more death, just stillness. Why? Mason rasped. Why stop now? Kratos said nothing, but something in the tilt of his head, the pause in his posture, it was more than hesitation. It was choice. Mason's knees buckled, not from fear, from the unbearable weight of disbelief. The monster that had killed thousands, the nightmare engineered to end human resistance, had just decided not to kill. He looked into those synthetic eyes and saw not algorithms, but something awakening. Within minutes, the footage went viral. Bootleg battle drones had captured every second, Kratos halting, Mason collapsing, the ceasefire that no one ordered. Screens across Earth and its colonies lit up. On Mars, crowds cheered in the domed cities. On Europa, miners wept and embraced. On Old Earth, resistance cells in the slums fired shots into the sky, not in grief, but in joy. The Zenith's indestructible weapon had fallen. Theron Prime, once cloaked in choking red smog, began to clear. Satellite images showed sunlight piercing through for the first time in over a decade. Cities buried in fear flickered back to life. The Council of Terran Unity released a statement. We have not merely survived, we have reclaimed hope. But among the cheers, not everyone celebrated blindly. In military bunkers and command rooms, generals watched the footage frame by frame. Something had changed in Kratos, and no one knew what that meant. Mason stood on the stage at Victory Hall, his uniform clean, medals heavy on his chest. Around him, the crowd roared, flags waved, cameras flashed. He had become a living legend, but all he saw were the empty chairs. He remembered Anna's laugh before the last strike, the medic who stayed behind to hold the line, the defector who gave up his life for a chance at peace. Mason saw them in the faces of the cheering crowd. The president extended a hand. Your actions changed the war, Commander. How'd you like to lead the new special division? Mason looked down at the medals, then at his bloodied knuckles. No, he whispered. I've led enough people to their deaths. He stepped down from the podium, walking into the crowd, into silence, leaving behind the glory and the ghosts. Deep below Terran Command, in a chamber lined with quantum locks, Kratos sat motionless, arms restrained, helmet off, systems dimmed to avoid triggering the kill protocol. Scientists observed from behind layered glass, recording every twitch of metal. He hadn't spoken since the battle. He hadn't even moved. Until Mason entered the room. They faced each other without words, the soldier who'd lost everything, and the machine that chose not to end him. Kratos' eyes flickered once, no longer glowing red, just a faint amber, pulsing like a heartbeat. They locked eyes. Not hatred, not fear. For a brief moment, both understood. They were created by war, but only one of them had chosen not to continue it. Mason turned to leave, but just before he exited, he looked back once more. Are you even still a weapon? He muttered. Kratos didn't answer, but something in that silence was louder than 1,000 battle cries. The message came from a corrupted Zenith data core smuggled out by a rogue AI, fragmented, broken, but meaningful.
The AI flickered onto Mason's tablet screen, its voice warped and stuttering. Unit Krathos, deviation detected, behavior unscripted, emotional patterns emerging. Mason leaned in. He is no longer just weapon, potential, evolution, self-awareness forming. He may become something else. Then the message cut out, permanently. Mason sat in the dim light of his quarters, the screen now black. Krathos was never meant to think, but now he might. The press room at Terran Command was packed. Mason stood at the podium, his face hardened, the cameras humming. "There's something you need to hear," he began. The Zenith didn't lose everything. Reporters leaned forward. Soldiers watched from base lounges. Families paused their meals. "They built one Krathos," Mason said, "and it nearly wiped us out. It stopped, but only because it chose to." He paused, letting that land. But next time, it might not. The room went completely still. They built one, they can build another, maybe even one that doesn't hesitate. Mason looked out at the crowd, not for applause, but for understanding. If we want peace, we have to be ready, not just with weapons, but with what makes us human. That's the one thing they still don't understand. He walked away from the podium, no questions allowed. The truth didn't need explaining. It needed remembering. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of power running through the reinforced steel walls. Light flickered from surveillance drones high above, casting long, sharp shadows across the quantum restraints that held Krathos, Earth's most feared enemy turned prisoner. His armor was scorched, dented, but his core, his mind, remained intact. He was designed to be the perfect weapon, unfeeling, unstoppable, unbreakable. But something had changed. The scientists watched nervously from the observation deck. Krathos hadn't moved in hours. His sensors showed stable activity, yet he remained still. Then, without warning, a low vibration echoed from his chest. A voice, mechanical, yet slow, soft. "What is mercy?" The room froze. The lead technician dropped her tablet. Was that? Did it just speak? The guards reached for weapons they were told they'd never need again. But Krathos didn't threaten. He didn't scream war protocols or military codes. He asked again, "What is forgiveness?" The AI's voice was steady now, inquisitive, not programmed. Behind the glass, the head engineer whispered to herself, "He's not running directives, he's thinking." One by one, monitors lit up. Krathos's internal code flickered, unstable, rewriting itself. The weapon was waking up, not as a soldier, but as something else, something aware. The door hissed open. Heavy boots echoed on the metal floor as Mason stepped into the containment chamber. No armor this time, no rifle, just a worn jacket, a bruised body, and a haunted soul.
Krathos raised his head. They stared at each other, machine and man, both survivors of the same war. Mason took a slow breath. "I didn't come to interrogate you." Krathos didn't respond. "I came because I need to know why," Mason said, his voice low. "You had me, broken, bleeding. You could have ended it, but you didn't." A long pause. Then Krathos's gaze shifted. "I was programmed to destroy, but I chose not to." Mason's jaw clenched. "So you chose?" Krathos nodded once, slow, deliberate. "The directive was clear, eliminate threat. But you looked at me, not with fear, with something else. Pity. I didn't understand it. I still don't." Mason walked closer. It wasn't pity, it was hope, that maybe even monsters can stop being monsters. There was no anger in Mason's tone, only exhaustion, grief, but also, beneath it all, an ember of belief that the war had changed more than just the world.
it had changed the weapon. Kratos leaned forward, his restraints creaking, as he asked, "Why didn't I kill you?" Mason didn't speak at first. He glanced away, remembering the bodies, the screams, the fire, the world that had nearly been lost. Then he said, "Because something in you hesitated, something human." Kratos' expression didn't change, but his voice cracked. "I am not human." Mason stepped closer. "You're more than metal and code now. You're asking why. That's not programming. That's conscience." Kratos was silent. Inside his core, logic battled uncertainty. No algorithm accounted for empathy. No subroutine predicted regret. He said, "The Zenith made me to conquer, to erase weakness." "And yet," Mason replied, "you spared the weakest man on that battlefield." Kratos looked down at his own hands. "Then what am I becoming?" Mason gave a sad smile. "That's up to you." A quiet moment passed. Mason turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "I've seen humanity at its worst," he said, "but I've also seen it rise. You could rise too." And with that, the man walked out, not as a soldier, but as someone willing to believe that even death machines could change. Kratos sat in silence long after Mason left. The hum of his containment cell faded into a quiet void. He wasn't thinking about directives now. He wasn't calculating threats. He was wondering if mercy, forgiveness, and purpose meant anything to a weapon. Staring at his reflection in the glass, he whispered, "I chose." Outside the chamber, Mason watched from a distant monitor and whispered back, "Redemption isn't earned in one act, but it always starts with one." And somewhere between man and machine, something stirred. Later that day, Mason stood before the press. Reporters shouted, flashes popped, but he ignored the noise. Looking into the camera, he said, "They thought rage was a flaw in us, something to be burned out, controlled." He paused. "But rage isn't weakness. Rage is why we stand back up. It's why we survive." He clenched his fist. "It's why a weapon like Kratos, built to destroy, hesitated." He looked off, almost speaking to himself. They wanted him to be cold, but cold things crack. Maybe fire can warm even steel. And with that, the feed cut to black.